There is a structure on the edge of the Sahara Desert that has been standing for more than 4,500 years. It has survived earthquakes, floods, wars, the rise and collapse of entire empires, and the slow grinding erosion of centuries of desert wind. At the time it was completed, it was the tallest structure human beings had ever built on the face of the earth, a title it would hold for nearly 4,000 years. No other building in human history has held the record for that long. Nothing else has even come close. It is, of course, the Great Pyramid of Giza. And here is the question that keeps archaeologists, engineers, historians, and millions of curious people awake at night. How exactly did they do it? Not just the raw logistics, not just they cut stones and stacked them. The deeper question, the question that gets under your skin and refuses to leave, how did a civilization without steel machinery, without computer modeling, without cranes, without modern surveying equipment, produce a structure so precisely aligned to true north that the margin of error is less than 1/15th of 1 degree? How did they quarry, transport, and position approximately 2.3 million stone blocks, with individual blocks weighing anywhere from 2.5 tons to 80 tons? Some of them fitted so tightly together that you cannot slide a human hair between the joints. How did they do any of this? And the follow-up question, the one that tends to get people really animated, is everything we think we know about the pyramids actually true? Because here is the thing. Every generation of archaeologists, physicists, engineers, and curious amateurs who have turned their attention to the pyramids has come away with the same feeling. There is more going on here than the textbook version admits. The more closely you look, the stranger it gets. And some of the strangest details are not the ones promoted by conspiracy theorists or ancient astronaut enthusiasts. They are the ones sitting quietly in peer-reviewed scientific journals, published by serious researchers from major universities, largely ignored by popular culture, because they do not fit neatly into the comfortable story we have been telling about ancient Egypt for a very long time. This is not a video about aliens. There is absolutely no credible evidence that extraterrestrials built the pyramids, and we are not going to pretend otherwise. But this is a video about something potentially more interesting than aliens. The actual documented, scientifically verified strangeness of what the ancient Egyptians accomplished. The legitimate mysteries that remain unsolved after centuries of investigation. The suppressed complexities. The contested discoveries. The hidden corridors that nobody fully understands yet. By the time we are done tonight, you are going to see the pyramids differently. Not as tourist postcards, not as ancient relics of a primitive civilization, but as something that challenges almost everything we assume about the capabilities of people who lived 4,000 years ago. Let us start at the very beginning. Before we talk about who built the pyramids, or how, or why, we need to spend some time with the numbers, because the numbers are where the strangeness begins. And once you really sit with the numbers, the story becomes much harder to explain away. The Great Pyramid of Giza, technically known as the Pyramid of Khufu, sits on a base that covers approximately 13 acres, roughly the footprint of 10 American football fields, placed side by side. The original height of the structure, before its polished outer limestone casing was stripped away over the centuries, was approximately 481 feet. That is close to the height of a modern 50-story skyscraper. The entire structure contains an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks. None of that is particularly mysterious on its own. What becomes mysterious is the precision. The base of the Great Pyramid is almost perfectly level. We are talking about a 13-acre platform, carved and prepared out of natural bedrock, leveled to within about 2.1 centimeters from corner to corner. 2.1 centimeters across 13 acres. Today, with laser leveling equipment, professional construction crews equipped with modern technology still struggle to achieve that kind of flatness over large areas. The ancient Egyptians accomplished it using tools we cannot even fully identify on a scale that dwarfs most modern construction projects. The sides of the base are almost perfectly equal in length. The east side measures approximately 755.8 feet. The west side measures approximately 756 feet. The maximum difference between the longest and shortest sides is less than 8 inches. 8 inches across a base that extends more than 755 feet in each direction. And then there is the alignment. The sides of the Great Pyramid face the four cardinal directions, north, south, east, west, with astonishing accuracy. The north side deviates from true geographic north by only about 3.4 arc minutes. One arc minute is 1/60th of 1 degree. So the margin of error in the pyramid's north alignment is about 1/15th of a degree, an accuracy of approximately 1 millimeter per meter. All three of the largest Egyptian pyramids show the same direction of error. They were all aligned using the same method. The method itself is still debated. What has been definitively established is that the alignment is real, it is remarkable, and no one has yet produced a completely satisfying explanation for exactly how they achieved it. Here is where things get genuinely strange, in a way that has sparked decades of academic argument. When you start calculating ratios and proportions within the dimensions of the Great Pyramid, you keep running into numbers that should not logically be there, numbers that were not supposed to have been formalized mathematically until thousands of years after the pyramid was built. Take the relationship between the pyramid's base perimeter and its height. If you take the original height of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by 2 times pi, you get a number extremely close to the base perimeter of the pyramid. Pi appears to be encoded in the basic proportions of the structure. Then there is phi, the golden ratio, approximately 1.618. When you divide the slant height of the Great Pyramid by half the length of the base, you get a number very close to phi. Now here is the honest scientific caveat. There are researchers who argue quite reasonably that these apparent mathematical relationships may be coincidental. When you have a structure with many measurable dimensions, you can generate a large number of ratios, and some of those ratios will inevitably come close to well-known mathematical constants, purely by chance. That is a fair point, and yet the alignment to pi is not just approximate. An academic paper confirmed that the pyramid's proportions fit both pi and phi, with 2 to 3 decimal places of precision, more than enough for construction purposes. Whether the ancient Egyptians consciously encoded pi and phi into their design, or whether the proportions emerged organically from construction methods that happened to produce those ratios, remains genuinely unresolved. What is not unresolved is that the ratios are there. You can measure them yourself. The numbers are in the stone. Now let us talk about what might be the most practically puzzling aspect of the entire pyramid: the stone. The Great Pyramid contains approximately 2.3 million blocks. The average weight of a block is around 2.5 to 3 tons. But those are the average blocks. The situation becomes dramatically more complicated when you look at specific sections. Inside the pyramid, the king's chamber, a room built entirely of pink granite quarried from Aswan, which is approximately 500 miles south of Giza, is constructed from granite blocks weighing between 25 and 80 tons each. The ceiling of the king's chamber alone is composed of 9 massive granite beams, each weighing approximately 25 to 40 tons, spanning a room that measures roughly 34 feet long by 17 feet wide by 19 feet high. Above the king's chamber, the ancient builders constructed 5 so-called relieving chambers, one stacked above another. These chambers distribute the immense weight of the millions of tons of masonry above, preventing it from crushing the king's chamber below. In 4,500 years, only a single small crack has developed. Just one. The engineering has held for millennia, but getting the granite there in the first place is the problem that keeps engineers up at night. The granite for the king's chamber came from Aswan, 500 miles upriver. The blocks weigh anywhere from 25 to 80 tons. How did the ancient Egyptians move them? For a long time, the standard answer was wooden sledges, ramps, human muscle. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated that this works for moving blocks across flat surfaces. But hauling an 80-ton granite slab up a construction ramp to a height of hundreds of feet presents engineering challenges that have never been fully resolved. Some calculations suggest that a ramp capable of delivering blocks to the upper portions of the pyramid would have required almost as much material as the pyramid itself. More recently, researchers have proposed entirely different approaches. A study published in PLOS One presented evidence that ancient Egyptian pyramid builders may have used hydraulic technology, a system in which water was channeled into shafts and chambers to help float or lift massive blocks using buoyancy and water pressure. The team identified what they describe as a dam, a water treatment facility, and a hydraulic elevator associated with the step pyramid of Saqqara. This is a serious study, published in a serious journal. And then there is the concrete theory. In 2006, materials scientist Michel Barsoum and his research group at Drexel University published findings from extensive scanning electron microscope analysis of pyramid stones. Their conclusion was striking. The tiniest structures within certain casing stones were consistent with reconstituted limestone. In other words, limestone that had been broken down into its components and then recast, essentially making a very early form of concrete. The concrete theory would explain something that has puzzled researchers for years: why some of the stone blocks fit so perfectly together that not even a human hair can be slid between them. If you cast blocks in place rather than cutting and hauling them, the fit can be essentially perfect. It remains a minority view, but minority does not mean wrong. For as long as most people can remember, the mental image of pyramid construction has been the same. Thousands of enslaved people, whipped by overseers, dragging massive blocks under a blazing desert sun. It is dramatic. It is vivid. It appears in movies, textbooks, and popular retellings of ancient history around the world. It is almost certainly wrong. The evidence pointing in a different direction has been building for decades, but it crystallized spectacularly in 2013, when a team of French archaeologists made one of the most significant discoveries in Egyptology in modern times. Working at a remote location on the coast of the Red Sea called Wadi el-Jarf, they found the oldest papyri ever discovered in Egypt. And among those papyri was something extraordinary: the personal diary of a man named Merer. Merer was a middle-ranking official with the title of inspector, a supervisor overseeing a team of roughly 200 men. His logbook dates to year 27 of Khufu's reign. It records month after month of daily operations in meticulous detail. He describes leading his team on boat trips between the limestone quarries at Tura and the construction site at Giza. He records the specific days of travel, the quantities of stone delivered, the names of officials he reported to. One surviving entry reads, in translation, Inspector Merer spends the day with his team hauling stones in South Tora, spends the night in South Tora, sets sail from South Tora laden with stone blocks to Akhet Khufu, spends the night at Shi Khufu. The precision, the routine, the bureaucratic normalcy of it all is remarkable. Merer's diary tells us several things with certainty. The limestone casing was being transported by boat along a canal system. The project was organized with extraordinary administrative sophistication. There were inspectors, teams with designations, regular reporting structures. This was not a chaotic mob of enslaved laborers. This was a managed, systematized industrial operation. Independent of Merer's diary, decades of archaeological excavation near Giza have also demolished the slave narrative. Archaeologist Mark Lehner and his team spent years excavating what they believed to be the workers' village. What they found was not the squalor you would associate with slave quarters. They found organized housing, bakeries, breweries, a fish processing facility, a medical facility, They found the bones of cattle, sheep, and goats, indicating that the workers were being fed substantial quantities of meat. The workers' cemetery is equally revealing. The graves contain skeletons showing signs of bone fractures that had been set and healed, meaning injured workers received medical care. Some bodies show evidence of amputations that the workers survived. These are not the anonymous mass graves of disposable enslaved labor. These are the burial sites of people who were valued enough to receive treatment and to be interred with some degree of dignity. Graffiti marks left by work gangs inside the relieving chambers above the king's chamber include the names of the gangs themselves, some of which translated to boastful phrases like Friends of Khufu, the kind of competitive team identity you would expect from people who took pride in their work, not from people toiling under forced labor. Here is a mystery that was hiding in plain sight for centuries, finally resolved only very recently. If you visit the Giza Plateau today, you are standing in the desert. The Nile River is several miles to the east. The landscape around the pyramids is dry, sandy, and barren. Looking at it, you might reasonably wonder, why here? Why build the pyramids in this particular spot, so far from the river that would have been the primary highway for transporting massive stone blocks? For a long time, the answer was essentially, we don't know. Then in 2024, a team of researchers from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, published findings that changed the picture dramatically. Using a combination of radar satellite imagery, historical maps, geophysical surveys, and sediment core analysis, the team was able to map the course of what they named the Aramat Branch, an ancient Nile tributary that once ran along the base of the Giza Plateau and passed no fewer than 31 pyramid sites. The Aramat branch was enormous, between 500 meters and 700 meters wide, between 15 and 26 meters deep. A major river, it did not dry up overnight. It shrank gradually over thousands of years as climate patterns shifted and the Sahara dried out, eventually leaving the pyramids stranded in what appeared to be an inexplicably remote desert location. The discovery reframes the geography of the entire pyramid building era. The pyramids were not remote when they were built. They were riverside. They sat at the edge of a major waterway that served as the logistical highway for the entire project, just as Mera's diary describes. Boats loaded with limestone blocks, sailing up and down a canal system connecting the quarries at Tora with the construction site at Giza. The river brought the stone. The river fed the workers. The river made the whole project possible. And then the river quietly disappeared over millennia, leaving behind a mystery about location that puzzled researchers for centuries, until satellite radar finally found the ghost of the vanished water in the sediments beneath the sand. There is a theory that, once you hear it, is very difficult to get out of your head. In 1983, a man named Robert Bauval was working in Saudi Arabia and took his family out into the desert one night to look at the stars. His friend pointed out the constellation of Orion and mentioned that Al-Nitak, the most easterly of the three stars in Orion's belt, was offset slightly from the other two. Bauval looked up at the three belt stars and thought of the three pyramids at Giza. The three main Giza pyramids are also not arranged in a perfectly straight line. Menkaure, the smallest of the three, is slightly offset to the east, just as Al-Nitak is slightly offset. The diagonal orientation of all three pyramids matches the diagonal orientation of Orion's belt. And crucially, the relative sizes match. Khufu, the largest, corresponds to Al-Nitak, the brightest belt star. Khafre corresponds to Al-Nilam, and Menkaure corresponds to Mintaka, which is also the faintest of the three belt stars. The theory has genuine support from what we know about ancient Egyptian beliefs. The god Osiris, associated with death, resurrection, and the afterlife, was identified with the constellation of Orion. The pyramid texts contain explicit references to the deceased pharaoh journeying to Orion after death, building a complex of monuments that mirrors the appearance of Orion's belt on the ground, is completely consistent with a religious cosmology that identifies the afterlife with that particular region of the sky. The theory also has serious critics. Astronomers Ed Krupp and Anthony Farrell independently investigated the angular correspondence and found that the angle did not match precisely. Most mainstream Egyptologists regard the Orion correlation theory as an interesting but not proven idea. But here is what is important to keep in mind. The connection between Orion and Osiris is not speculation. It is documented in ancient Egyptian religious texts. The debate is about the specific nature and precision of the correspondence, not about whether the builders were thinking about the sky at all. They unquestionably were. The four narrow shafts built into the Great Pyramid point at specific elevations in the sky. At the time the pyramid was built, around 2500 BCE, the southern shaft of the king's chamber pointed almost directly at Orion's belt as it crossed the meridian. The northern shaft pointed toward Thuban, which was then the North Pole star, the star around which all other stars appeared to rotate. Whether these alignments were intentional or not remains genuinely contested. But the alignments exist, they can be measured. Here is something that is easy to forget when you look at photographs of the Great Pyramid from the outside. Almost none of it has ever been explored. The structure contains an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks. The accessible interior chambers represent an almost infinitesimally small fraction of the pyramid's total volume. For most of modern history, Egyptologists assumed that what you see on the maps of the known interior was essentially what existed. The rest was just solid stone. Then in 2016 and 2017, a team of researchers called Scan Pyramids changed everything. Scan Pyramids was an international research partnership that used cutting-edge non-invasive technologies to scan the interior of the pyramids, without drilling, cutting, or disturbing the structures in any way. The primary technique they used was muon tomography. Muons are subatomic particles created when cosmic rays from space collide with Earth's upper atmosphere. They rain down continuously onto every surface on Earth. They pass through solid rock, but they are slightly absorbed as they do. By placing detectors inside the pyramid and measuring where more muons were passing through than expected, the team could map hidden voids, empty spaces where muons encountered less material than the surrounding solid stone. In October 2016, Scan Pyramids announced their first confirmed void discovery, a previously unknown cavity near the northeast edge of the Great Pyramid. A genuine unknown, a space inside the world's most studied building that no one had known was there. But the really dramatic discovery came in 2017. The team announced the detection of a massive void above the Grand Gallery, the spectacular corbelled hallway nearly 150 feet long and approximately 28 feet high that leads up toward the king's chamber. The void above the Grand Gallery was at least 100 feet long, oriented similarly to the Grand Gallery. Located just above it, the Scan Pyramids team referred to it as the Big Void. No one knows what the Big Void is. The discovery was published in the journal Nature, and the Egyptians left the interior walls of the Great Pyramid completely undecorated. There is nothing written on the walls to explain what any of the rooms are for. Then in 2023, a new discovery by the Scan Pyramids team revealed a hidden corridor, 9 meters long and about 2 meters wide by 2 meters tall, located near the north face of the pyramid, just above the main entrance. Researchers carefully inserted an endoscope through a tiny gap between stones and captured the first images of the hidden space. And in November 2025, researchers announced the discovery of 2 air-filled voids beneath the granite floor sections of the Pyramid of Menkaure. Their presence may indicate a previously unknown entrance to the pyramid. The pattern is consistent and somewhat unsettling if you think about it. Every time we look more carefully at these structures with new technology, we find something we did not know was there. After centuries of study, we do not have a complete map of the interior of the most studied building in the world. Entire corridors and chambers may exist that no living person has ever seen. Whatever you believe about the pyramids, the Sphinx adds another layer of mystery that cannot easily be dismissed. The Great Sphinx of Giza sits just east of the pyramid complex, carved from the natural limestone bedrock of the plateau. At approximately 240 feet long and 66 feet tall, it is the largest monolithic statue in the world. The conventional Egyptological date for the Sphinx places its construction around 2500 BCE during the reign of Khafre. This would make it roughly contemporaneous with the Giza pyramids. But in the early 1990s, a geologist named Robert Schoch looked at the Sphinx and saw something that troubled him deeply and has been troubling geologists and Egyptologists ever since. Schoch was brought to Giza by researcher John Anthony West, who had proposed that the erosion patterns on the Sphinx looked like water erosion, specifically rain erosion, rather than the wind and sand erosion you would expect from a structure that has spent most of its existence in a desert environment. Schoch is a legitimate geologist with a PhD from Yale University. He studied the erosion patterns in person and concluded that West was right. The key observation is this: the body of the Sphinx and the walls of the enclosure in which it sits show a distinctive pattern of deep, rounded, vertical weathering, channels and undulations running from top to bottom on the walls. This pattern is characteristic of what happens when rain falls heavily on soft limestone over a long period of time. Wind erosion with sand, by contrast, tends to create horizontal striations and undercutting at the base. Schoch argues that the rainfall erosion pattern requires a much longer period of significant rainfall than the conventional date of the Sphinx would allow for. Egypt has been largely dry for the last 5,000 to 6,000 years. For the Sphinx to show the degree of precipitation erosion that Schoch observes, the structure would need to have been exposed to significant rainfall for thousands of years before the desert climate became established, which would place its construction at minimum in the period before 5000 BCE, and possibly as far back as 7000 to 9700 BCE. If Schoch is right, the Sphinx is dramatically older than the pyramids. It could predate what we consider the beginning of ancient Egyptian civilization by thousands of years. Most Egyptologists reject this conclusion, and they have specific objections. Other geologists have proposed that the erosion features could result from salt crystallization rather than rain. New geoarchaeological evidence has also suggested that heavier than expected rainfalls may have occurred at Giza through the end of the Old Kingdom. Schoch himself disputes these counter-arguments point by point. The debate has been running for more than 30 years, and neither side has completely convinced the other. What should you take away from this? Simply that a credentialed geologist, looking at the physical evidence of the world's most famous sculpture, has concluded that it may be far older than the academic consensus allows, and that, despite decades of counter-argument, his core geological observations have never been fully refuted. The erosion is there. What caused it, and when, remains genuinely contested. Here is something that will probably surprise you. No mummy has ever been found inside the Great Pyramid of Giza. Think about that for a moment. The Great Pyramid is traditionally described as the tomb of Pharaoh Khufu. His name is associated with it in ancient sources. The internal chambers are called the King's Chamber and the Queen's Chamber. There is a sarcophagus inside the King's Chamber, an enormous granite box, too large to have been brought in through any existing passage, meaning it must have been placed there during construction. And yet, no mummy, no burial goods, no inscriptions, no paintings, nothing that you would expect to find in a royal Egyptian tomb. The King's Chamber, when it was entered by Arab explorers around 820 CE, was empty. The sarcophagus was empty and lidless. The room was bare of decoration. Everything that defines an ancient Egyptian royal burial, the elaborate grave goods, the painted walls, the canopic jars, the golden artifacts. None of it was there. The standard explanation is looting. The pyramid was broken into and robbed in antiquity. The thinking goes, and everything that was originally inside was stolen. This is a perfectly reasonable explanation. But the absence of inscriptions is harder to explain away. Ancient Egyptian royal tombs were covered in religious texts and images. The walls spoke. They told the story of the pharaoh's life. They proclaimed his divine nature. They described his journey through the underworld. These inscriptions were not optional luxury items that could be looted. They were spiritual necessities. And yet the Great Pyramid has absolutely none of them, anywhere. The interior walls are bare. Some researchers argue that the Fourth Dynasty represented a brief experimental period when the royal burial tradition temporarily dispensed with wall inscriptions. This is the mainstream view. Others note that the absence of any inscriptions, combined with the absence of any mummy or confirmed burial goods, raises a legitimate question. Was the Great Pyramid actually used as a tomb? Or was it built for some other primary purpose, with the burial function being secondary, symbolic, or never actually employed? The honest answer is, we do not know, and anyone who tells you otherwise is speaking with more confidence than the evidence supports. Here is a question that Egyptologists have been wrestling with quietly for decades, mostly outside public view. What was at Giza before the pyramids? The conventional story presents the Giza plateau as essentially empty until Khufu arrived in the Fourth Dynasty and began construction around 2560 BCE. But the archaeological evidence tells a more complicated story. Excavations at Giza have uncovered pre-dynastic pottery at multiple locations on the plateau, pottery that predates the Fourth Dynasty by a significant margin. There are early dynastic tombs from the First and Second Dynasties located to the south of the main pyramid field. These tombs predate the Great Pyramid by several hundred years and indicate that the Giza Plateau was not an uninhabited blank slate when Khufu chose it for his monument. More intriguingly, debris dumps associated with Khufu's construction project, the massive amounts of material cleared from the plateau to make way for the pyramid complex, contain material that researchers have dated to earlier periods. Archaeologist Carl Kromer, who excavated one of these ancient dump sites in detail, concluded that the dump contained material from a settlement that had existed on the plateau, from the First Dynasty through the Third Dynasty, covering several hundred years before the Fourth Dynasty pyramids were built. In other words, people were living on the Giza Plateau for centuries before the pyramids went up. There was a settlement there. When Khufu decided to build his pyramid, that pre-existing settlement was apparently cleared away. Its debris was pushed aside to make room for the new construction. And in the process, the traces of what had been there before were partially buried and partially scattered. What was in that settlement? We do not know enough to say. To understand the Great Pyramid fully, you need to understand that it did not appear from nowhere. It was the end product of a centuries-long process of experimentation, failure, innovation, and refinement. The story starts with the Step Pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara, built approximately 60 years before the Great Pyramid during the Third Dynasty. The Step Pyramid was the first large-scale stone monument in human history. Before it, even royal Egyptian architecture relied primarily on mud brick. Its architect, a man named Imhotep, essentially invented monumental stone construction from scratch. Imhotep's name was remembered for thousands of years after his death. He was eventually deified and worshipped as a god of wisdom and medicine, one of the very few non-royal Egyptians to receive divine status. That tells you something about how extraordinary his contemporaries considered his achievement. After Djoser, the transition to the true smooth-sided pyramid began under Pharaoh Sneferu, Khufu's father. Sneferu's experiments are fascinating because they let us watch Egyptian architects learning in real time. Sneferu's first major pyramid at Meidum was originally built as a step pyramid and then converted to a true pyramid by filling in the steps with packing stone encasing. Something went wrong. The outer casing eventually collapsed. Today, the Meidum Pyramid looks like a stone tower rising from a mound of rubble, a startling reminder that even the greatest engineering tradition in the ancient world had its failures. Then Sneferu began a second pyramid at Dashur. The bent pyramid starts at a steep angle of approximately 54 degrees, and then, roughly halfway up, the angle abruptly changes to a shallower 43 degrees. The change in angle partway through construction suggests the builders detected structural problems and decided to reduce the load on the lower courses by changing the slope. Having learned from that experience, Sneferu built a third pyramid, the Red Pyramid at Dashur, the world's first successful, true, smooth-sided pyramid. It stands today in excellent condition. Sneferu built 3 large pyramids. In total, he may have moved more stone than his son Khufu did for the Great Pyramid. He was conducting what amounted to a multi-decade architectural research program, learning through building what worked and what did not. And then his son Khufu took everything Sneferu had learned, applied it at Giza, increased the scale dramatically, and executed the project with a precision that still baffles researchers today. The Great Pyramid is not a miracle that arrived from nowhere. It was the product of generations of accumulated knowledge, incremental refinement, and willingness to try things, fail, learn, and try again. The 3 Giza pyramids are so famous that they tend to crowd out the broader reality. Egypt has more than 100 pyramids. Not 3, more than 100. They range from enormous to modest, from perfectly preserved to crumbled ruins, spanning roughly 1,000 years of construction from the Old Kingdom through the Middle Kingdom period. Further south at Saqqara, the 5th and 6th dynasty pyramid complexes are where the pyramid texts first appear. Those extraordinary collections of religious spells and rituals carved into the walls of burial chambers, representing the oldest known corpus of religious literature in the world. The pyramid texts from the Pyramid of Unas, who ruled around 2375 BCE, contain passages that scholars believe preserve mythological traditions far older than the texts themselves. Some of the language and imagery appears archaic even within the context of ancient Egyptian culture, tantalizing hints that the ideas being expressed had roots reaching back deeper into prehistoric time than we can easily trace. North of Egypt, in modern Sudan, the ancient Nubian kingdoms of Kush and Meroe built more than 250 pyramids of their own, spanning from roughly 700 BCE to roughly 350 CE. The Nubian pyramids are steeper and more slender than their Egyptian counterparts. Sudan, by some counts, has more pyramids than Egypt. The spread of pyramid building across northeastern Africa and across different time periods is itself a mystery worth contemplating. Why pyramids? What is it about this particular shape, a square base rising to a point, that proved so compelling to so many different cultures across so many centuries? The pyramid appears not just in Egypt and Nubia, but in Mesopotamia in the form of ziggurats, in Mexico and Central America among the Maya and Aztec and their predecessors, in Southeast Asia, and in China. The specific construction traditions are entirely independent. There is no evidence of cultural contact between ancient Egypt and the Americas that would explain any shared inspiration. But the convergence on roughly similar shapes across completely unconnected cultures remains one of the more interesting puzzles in architectural history. Let us address directly the argument that is always lurking in the background of any serious discussion about the pyramids. The suggestion that the ancient Egyptians could not have built the pyramids with the tools and technology available to them. This argument comes in many forms. Let us focus on the honestly difficult version. The difficulty is not that any single aspect of the pyramid is technically impossible with ancient tools and methods. Experimental archaeologists have demonstrated repeatedly that you can cut limestone with copper chisels, move large blocks on sledges with water lubrication, and align structures to true north using stellar observations. None of these things are mysterious in isolation. The difficulty is the combination, the scale, the precision, the sustained organizational complexity across what must have been decades of continuous construction. The logistics of feeding, housing, organizing, and managing a workforce of tens of thousands of people, quarrying and transporting millions of tons of stone from multiple sources, maintaining quality control over 2.3 million individual blocks, and achieving a final product aligned to within 1/15th of 1 degree of true north, all simultaneously, all over a period of roughly 20 years, all without the administrative tools that modern large-scale construction projects depend on. The administrative sophistication implied by the pyramid's construction is in some ways more impressive than the physical engineering. Mera's diary gives us a glimpse of one small piece of the system. One inspector with 200 men making 10 trips per month, delivering approximately 200 blocks per trip. That is one team delivering maybe 2,000 blocks a month. To deliver 2.3 million blocks in 20 years requires roughly 115,000 blocks per year, or about 10,000 blocks per month. Mera's team alone delivered 2,000 per month, meaning roughly 5 teams like Mera's were needed just for the limestone deliveries. And that says nothing about the granite teams, the food supply teams, the water supply teams, the tool-making teams, the leveling and surveying teams, and all the other specialized operations that must have been running simultaneously. The honest conclusion is not that the construction required technology beyond what ancient Egyptians possessed. The honest conclusion is that we have consistently underestimated the organizational and engineering capabilities of people who lived 4,000 years ago. Our mental model of ancient people as primitive, simple, and limited is wrong. The pyramid itself is proof that it is wrong. Here is something worth understanding about the pyramid you see in photographs today. It does not look the way it originally did. When the Great Pyramid was completed, it was encased in approximately 144,000 highly polished Torah limestone blocks. These casing stones, fitted together with extraordinary precision, covered the entire outer surface of the pyramid with a smooth, gleaming white shell. The exposed, rough-stepped appearance that the pyramid has today, the jagged staircase-like layers of blocks visible in every photograph, is not the original design. It is the result of centuries of stone removal. The polished white limestone casing made the pyramid look completely different. It would have appeared as a smooth, brilliant white geometric shape rising from the desert, almost blindingly reflective in the Egyptian sun. Ancient writers described the pyramid as gleaming, as shining, as catching the light so intensely it could be seen from great distances. The pyramid was not just enormous, it was radiant. The casing stones began to be removed after a major earthquake in 1303 CE loosened many of them. Local builders and authorities then systematically quarried the casing stones to use in the construction of mosques, palaces, and other buildings in Cairo. What you see when you look at photographs of the Great Pyramid today is a skeleton. The outer skin was stripped away over centuries. The pyramid you know is not the pyramid that was built. We spoke earlier about pi and phi appearing in the pyramid's proportions, but there is another set of mathematical observations that deserves its own discussion because the rabbit hole goes deeper than most people realize. The Great Pyramid's base perimeter is approximately 1,760 cubits, a cubit being the ancient Egyptian unit of measurement equal to approximately 20.5 inches. The height of the pyramid is approximately 280 cubits. When you divide the base perimeter by twice the height, you get approximately 3.14, an approximation of pi accurate to 3 significant figures. The University of Washington's mathematics department noted that this relationship is real. They also note the debate about whether this was intentional and observe that it is consistent with a construction method in which workers measure distance by rolling a drum or wheel of a fixed diameter. Essentially, every rotation of the wheel equals pi times the wheel's diameter in distance. If the wheel had a diameter of 1 cubit, then measuring distance by counting rotations would naturally encode pi into the structure's proportions. That is a beautifully practical explanation that requires no mystical interpretation. The builders may have used a metrological tool that embedded pi into their measurements, without them necessarily being aware of pi as a mathematical abstraction. The result, a pyramid that appears to encode pi, may have been a side effect of pragmatic engineering, or they may have understood the relationship and used it deliberately. The evidence does not fully resolve the question either way. What is not ambiguous is that when researchers studied the pyramid's proportions in detail, they confirmed that both pi and phi fit the pyramid's dimensions to multiple decimal places of precision. The mathematical regularities are in the stone. The interpretation of those regularities remains open. We have covered a lot of ground tonight. Let us take stock of where we are. We have established that the Great Pyramid was built with a precision of alignment and construction that challenges explanation even with modern engineering knowledge. Not because it is impossible to explain, but because no single explanation has been definitively verified and accepted. We have established that the structure was built not by slaves, but by an organized workforce of Egyptian citizens, managed through a sophisticated administrative system documented in the world's oldest papyri. We have established that the pyramid almost certainly sat beside a massive river branch, now buried under desert sand for thousands of years, explaining a geographic mystery that puzzled researchers for centuries. We have established that the pyramid contains hidden voids discovered only in 2016 and 2017 using particle physics, including the big void above the Grand Gallery whose purpose remains completely unknown. We have established that the Sphinx may be significantly older than the main pyramid complex, based on geological analysis of erosion patterns that the mainstream academic community has not fully resolved. We have established that the pyramid's proportions encode approximations of pi and phi to a precision that cannot be entirely explained as coincidence. We have established that the builders stripped away the gleaming white limestone casing of the pyramid over centuries, leaving us with a structure that looks fundamentally different from the one that was originally completed. And we have established that deep inside the pyramid, there is a bare granite sarcophagus in an undecorated chamber. No mummy was ever found, and the question of what the pyramid was truly for remains legitimately open. None of this requires ancient aliens. None of it requires a lost civilization. What it requires is a genuine reckoning with the fact that the ancient Egyptians were far more sophisticated, far more organized, and far more capable than the popular imagination typically allows. The mystery of the pyramids is not that they are impossible to have been built by human beings. The mystery is that the human beings who built them were operating at a level of organizational, engineering, and mathematical capability that we have been slow to fully acknowledge, and that even after centuries of study, they are still revealing secrets we did not know were there. A hidden corridor discovered in 2023, a big void discovered in 2017, a lost river mapped by satellite radar in 2024, new evidence of hydraulic construction technology published in peer-reviewed journals in 2024 and 2025. Every few years, the pyramids give us something new. Every few years, we have to update what we thought we knew. That is the real secret of the pyramids. Not that they hide alien technology or lost civilizations or suppressed history, but that they are so deep, so complex, so precisely made, and so old that no generation of researchers has ever fully understood them, and that every new tool we bring to them, every muon detector, every satellite radar, every endoscope threaded through a hairline crack between 4,000-year-old stones, reveals more of what we did not know. The pyramids are the longest conversation in human history between the present and the past is still talking. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, you are exactly who Dreamtime Documents was made for. Someone who wants the real story, the full story, the story with all the complicated and uncomfortable questions still in it. If this gave you something to think about, if it cracked open a question you did not have before, hit that like button right now. And subscribe to Dreamtime Documents so you never miss a deep dive into history's most fascinating mysteries. Ring the notification bell. Leave a comment telling me what you think the big void is. I read every single one. Good night.